Can you believe it? A group of Pakistanis made a ship propeller in a shabby workshop using a manual sand turning method. They first dug a square pit on the ground with a shovel and then put a propeller mold in it. They then filled the bottom of the mold with molding sand and fixed the mold with a hammer. They also had to manually trim the edge of the pit to get a perfect propeller cavity. They thought this was a very delicate work and it required a lot of experience to do well. But they soon made a basic cavity. They also sprinkled a layer of yellow fine sand on the cavity and smeared it evenly. They also covered the bottom of the cavity with a plastic bag and then filled the top of the mold with molding sand. They also used a piece of iron grid to cover the cavity and fixed it with wooden wedges. They also filled the gaps of the grid with molding sand. They did this to make the whole structure more solid. They lifted the iron grid and made a cover plate for the cavity. They then lifted the propeller mold and took it out. They then coated the surface of the cavity with a layer of paint and scraped it flat. They then used a flame spray gun to burn the cavity to make it solidify. They did this to give the cavity a heat protection function. They lifted the cover plate again and then buckled it on the cavity. In this way, a propeller-shaped cavity was formed in the cavity. They thought they were smart and could make a propeller with this method. The next thing they had to do was to cast iron. They smashed an old propeller and then put it in the furnace to melt. They also put some scrap copper and iron to make use of these resources. They soon got a furnace of molten iron. They lifted the furnace and moved it to the casting mouth of the cavity. They rotated the furnace and let the molten iron flow into the cavity. They thought they were awesome and could cast a propeller with this method. They filled the whole cavity with molten iron and completed the casting. They took out the wooden wedges and then lifted the cover plate with an iron lock. They dug out the surface of the molding sand and then lifted the finished product with an iron lock. A ship propeller appeared in front of them. They were shocked and could make a propeller with this method. They cleaned the surface of the sand and then weighed the propeller to see if it was qualified. They transported the propeller to the workshop and fixed it on a lathe. They turned the shaft part and drilled holes for installation. They made a manual sand turning ship propeller under a series of operations of the iron. What do you think of their work?